What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to Curious Raven Chronicles. This is the start of a new series called Campfire Tales. I'm going to try to make this a weekly feature featuring some ghost stories I've collected over the years. If you have any that you'd like me to read, everything would be confidential, but you can email curiousravenchronicles@outlook.com. This week's feature, Haunted Hospitals. Tales from those who work in the medical industry and some ghostly encounters that they have had. Here's the first one. It comes from a former security guard who worked in a psychiatric hospital. I was working in the ED that night, and a particularly combative, hyper-religious patient was in a 4-point restraint in a bed. It was a big, heavy, regular hospital bed. Myself and a fellow security guard were called to the scene because the staff was trying to do something with the patient. I forget exactly what. The patient became agitated and started screaming again, and then they began speaking in tongues. As the patient was freaking out, I saw the bed begin to lift off the floor. First one side, then the other. I was frozen for a few minutes watching this happen, unable to believe it, and the other staff seemed to pause as well. Eventually, I snapped out of it and helped everyone calm down the patient. Once things were settled, I stepped out of the room and asked my coworker if he saw the same thing. He said he'd seen it too. This was the freakiest thing, and I think the only time I have experienced any kind of potential valid ghost story. I'm kind of a skeptic, but open to any real experience. When I first started at the hospital, the charge nurse I made friends with on the oncology unit told me some ghost stories. One story was about a little boy who died a long time ago from severe burns when that was a pediatric ward. He said people will report seeing a little boy with bandages wrapped around his head, and they would die a day or two later. It sounded like a typical run-of-the-mill ghost story and urban legend until I was working on the med-surg floor across the hospital one day. I had this patient whose condition was not improving, an old man with heart failure and arrhythmias. At one point during the day, I go into the man's room and he says, "You all need to do something about this little boy that keeps coming in here." Since I hadn't seen any kids running around, I asked him who he was talking about. He said, "That little boy with all the bandages wrapped around his head." Needless to say, my heart sunk into my stomach, and I looked around the room and somewhat excited but scared as well, since I had never experienced anything like this before. I asked him if he had said anything to him. He said, "Yeah." He sticks his head out of the wall up there and smiles and asks if my pacemaker is still working, and he pointed to the upper back corner of the room near the ceiling. I'm sorry to tell you this, but there was nothing there. But I can say that this 100% freaked me out. He didn't see a boy again to my knowledge, but when I came back the next morning, he had been transferred to the ICU overnight. And this is the only time in my life I have truly believed or came close to experiencing a ghost story. I spent 10 years on an ambulance and never experienced anything I couldn't explain rationally. 2 years in the ED and it's no different. There's a relatively small number of ambulances in any given EMS system that all see more than their share of human suffering, but none were ever haunted as far as I could tell. My wife, however, did. Her first unit as a nurse was a med-surg and telemetry unit that had previously been a peds oncology unit. They were haunted, I believe in one room in particular, by the spirit of a young boy. He would make conversations with the staff when they weren't paying attention, and after a short while, the nurses would realize there shouldn't be a child on the unit late at night, and by then he'd be gone. This floor ended up being the standard destination in the hospital for dementia and encephalopathy, and often the altered and restrained patients would angrily demand that someone do something about this kid. We made fun of the idea when she started working there, but it soon stopped being funny to her as the occurrences kept piling up. I worked at a skilled nursing facility. My hospice patient was on his way out of life's door when I received him in the morning. He was laying in bed, not responding, but vital signs were still decent. He was saturating into the mid to high 80s on oxygen. After his morning assessment, I returned to his room before lunch. The first thing I hear is the O2 concentrator beeping and going haywire with some technical issue. When I approached his bed, he was sitting upright and had thrown off his oxygen. He was eating a cookie. He greeted me by name and told me his daughter was on the way to see him. I asked how he was feeling. He said, "Oh, I'm great, but the strangest thing keeps happening. My friends keep coming into the room, sitting in that chair there. And then one of them will get up and leave, and another will come and sit down." Chills were already crawling at my back when I asked him, "Are your friends dead?" He answered, "Yeah, I believe so." I checked his O2 saturation again, and it was at 95% without the O2 concentrator. He passed a day or two later, but I still believe his dead friends were coming into that room to see him to the other side and giving him a boost so he could visit with his daughter one last time. I was on call one evening in the winter, and since I used to live 45 minutes away, I just decided to sleep in the hospital due to the distance. I usually slept in the unused exam rooms near the cath lab and cardiac recovery unit, and aside from the occasional janitor, nobody ever bothered me. I liked exam room 3 the best since it had a marginally more comfortable bed. One night, I woke up at about 11:30 and just had a weird feeling. I don't usually sleep well on call anyway, so this wasn't out of the norm. In the darkness, and all in quick succession, I hear in the ceiling a metallic thud. Something plastic on the counter move and a paper towel from the dispenser wave in the breeze. I was too scared to look in that corner, and I just felt like a little kid when I pulled the covers tighter and tried to go back to sleep. I found out the next morning that exam room 3 is where cath lab will occasionally store the bodies of the deceased if the family would like to have some private moments before taking him to the morgue. So yeah, I never slept in that room again. We have a room on our unit we are convinced is haunted. It's that room that seems to have more patients die in it than any other room on the floor. Way before I started working there, one of our doctors, Dr. Stewart, got so frustrated with the amount of deaths in the room that he nailed an angel to the door holding a rosary. The doctor actually passed away a few years ago due to cancer. I've taken care of patients in this room and had some spooky experiences. There's a huge bathroom attached to this room and has a bathtub. This is an ICU room, so we don't really use it. And it acts as a storage closet more than anything else. I've had multiple instances where I have closed the door to the bathroom and left the patient's room only to discover it open again the next time I enter the room. I sit right outside the patient's room on my computer charting so I know for a fact that no one else has gone in. I've been in the middle of a patient care and heard loud thuds and bangs coming from inside the bathroom, only to open the door and see nothing has fallen and there's no one in there. There was a young pediatric patient in that room who kept talking about a doctor coming in her room and telling her she was going to be all right. No one knew who she was talking about. Eventually, she got well enough to walk around the unit when she pointed to a picture on the wall of the doctor who was helping her. It was a picture of Dr. Stewart, who had passed away several years ago. That's it for this week. And again, if you have any stories you'd like me to tell, we'll keep it confidential. We won't give your name out or anything like that. We'll just tell your story. Email me at curiousravenchronicles@outlook.com. Make sure you like and subscribe so you can see more of these videos coming up. Thanks for watching.